does an AI-first human-machine interface look like, right? If you're designing an interface from scratch, is it really going to be like your smartphone, or what else could it be?
That's Rana el Kaliouby, a leading innovator in the field of emotion AI, as in how machines can learn to measure and simulate human emotions. She's also my friend and colleague.
AI can unlock human potential, and it can be both massively economically successful and good for people. So it can help us be healthier, more productive, more knowledgeable, good for the planet. And then building empathy into these devices too. I think that's so important.
We often talk about the importance of IQ when it comes to AI, but Rana wants us to also consider EQ. Emotional intelligence is key to making more human-centric AI. Rana has dedicated her career to this conviction. She co-founded Affectiva, a company building technology to measure complex human emotions. She's also an investor and author of the best-selling memoir, Girl Decoded. And now she's adding a new title to the list, podcast host. Her new podcast, Pioneers of AI, goes behind the scenes of the AI revolution and gives you the tools to understand what's coming next. Rana el Kaliouby is a longtime friend of Masters of Scale. Today, we want to reintroduce her and welcome her new show, Pioneers of AI, to the podcast pantheon. And anytime I get to speak with Rana about where AI is headed, especially on the fronts of empathy and emotion, it's a thrill. Let's get to it. Welcome, Rana el Kaliouby, to Masters of Scale. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Me too. Hi, Reid.
So, even though we've covered this a little bit in the earlier Masters of Scale, that was long enough ago, let's still do a little bit of the origin story. So, say a little bit about like your path to becoming an AI academic, like where you grew up and how you chose your PhD and, you know, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, let's see. So I was born in Egypt, as you know, grew up around the Middle East. Both my parents were technologists, so we were always exposed to like a lot of technology early on. I wanted to be an academic, so I decided to study computer science as an undergraduate. Got really fascinated by this human-machine touch point, the human-machine interfaces, and how it not only affects our communication with technology, but our relationship with one another too. So that became kind of my area of focus. And I left Egypt to go do my PhD at Cambridge University in computer vision and machine learning over 25 years ago. So people think AI, is like this new thing. I'm like, oh, some of us have been doing this for a while. And pioneered an area or a category within AI called emotion recognition or artificial emotional intelligence. Towards the end of my PhD, I met this MIT professor. She was visiting Cambridge University to give a talk, and we clicked, and she invited me to join her as a postdoc at MIT, and that's how I ended up in the US.
One of the things that I think is also, for people who want to go deeper into your story, is, the memoir Girl Decoded. Obviously a great, clever title in lots of different ways. People way under-describe the EQ issues within computer-human interaction, a bunch of other stuff. How much of the kind of that understanding, in addition to the kind of the path of your life, would people find from the memoir?
Yeah, the memoir is this juxtaposition of my personal journey with the journey of building the technology, because it's so intertwined. So I talk about why do emotions matter, right? They influence every aspect of our lives, everything from our little decisions every day to big decisions we make, how we learn, how we connect with one another. And I'm sure our listeners, especially, everybody really will recognize that it's not just your IQ that matters, right? Your cognitive intelligence, but your emotional intelligence, your ability to tap into other people's emotional experiences and mental and emotional states. And that's how we motivate behavior change, influence people, persuade people to do things. So people who have higher EQs tend to be just better leaders and better partners. And I think that's going to be true. I do believe that's true for technology as well. So what's your view? What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think is funny is the people who say emotions don't affect how I make decisions, or I think actually, in fact, it affects them a lot and they just don't have visibility.
Right.
The question around, like, what words you choose or how different words, kind of affect you in different ways, even if they have largely similar, kind of semantic meaning, the choice of it. For example, very classically, you might say, like, I think I might have this point of view versus I have this point of view. Well,
Right.
very different emotional impacts.
But that's not what people typically focus on.
Rana believes that AI models need to be designed to pick up on such nuances, models that can understand the difference between a user saying, I think, versus I know. She sees this as fundamental to AI's development. And while others have ignored emotion in AI, she's dived in headfirst. The company she co-founded, Affectiva, revolutionized emotion AI. Rana has always been a trailblazer. From academia to entrepreneurship, she's plowed her way in a field where she was often the only woman and the only Muslim in the room.
I used to wear the hijab. I wore it for 12 years. I put it on willingly, and I took it off when it just didn't feel like me anymore. I also moved to the US with, as a single mom with 2 young kids. They were 10 and 4 at the time, and now they're 21 and 15. And so I think I'd like to believe that I've had this entrepreneurial spirit in me. And when I have conviction, I just go for it. And I think one of my core values is having courage to chart a path that maybe hasn't been charted before. So when it came to Affectiva, so here I am at MIT, I was funded by the National Science Foundation and Ross Picard's lab, but we started to get a lot of commercial interest in our technology, which is this facial expression recognition technology. And all these Fortune 500 companies wanted to use it for a variety of applications. And so I remember we walked into the Media Lab director's office at the time. It was Frank Moss. And we said, Frank, we need more dollars to hire more PhD students. And he thought about it for a second and he said, this is not research anymore. There's a commercialization opportunity here. And my initial reaction was like, whoa, wait, I'm about to apply for faculty, don't mess with my academic plans. But then I realized, and that was the tipping point for me, and I think that's my message to academics who are listening to this, entrepreneurship is an amazing path to actually bring your technology to scale, right? Like you take it from this academic setting where you're publishing papers and maybe 10 people are using it to scaling it worldwide. And that to me is what's so magical about starting a business.
That sense of taking insight and thought and research that you get from, kind of the academic side, and then applying it to how do you build scale companies, scale technologies, other kinds of things.
You don't have to say it wasn't easy, by the way. I want to share a story.
Please.
It's more of a confession, really. I'm a first-time founder. When I started Affectiva, it was my first time doing this. And I think I was really, there was a lot of stuff I didn't know. So for example, we had one of the investors who was courting us at the time send us an email and he said, one line, send me your BS. And I was like, I have no idea what this guy's talking about. Turns out he was asking for our balance sheet, right?
Although very early startups, BS also means the other thing that people think.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I was like, the only BS I know of, I can't really attach in an email. But then I was also like, our very first product roadmap, we were like, Q1, we're going to penetrate the advertising research market. Q2, we're going to do education. Q3 will be health. It was so naive and we had so underestimated how hard it would be. But I actually think that's okay because that gives you that conviction and that kind of belief that you can go for it is what keeps you going, I think.
I mean, I think a lot of the entrepreneurship stuff, you cannot fully prepare. There's no I prepare everything. You can prepare some. You just have to have that chutzpah and grit and, kind of very broad learning capabilities to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So go into a little bit more depth about both your research and Affectiva and what the shape of that has been.
So the core technology we developed at Affectiva was essentially an emotion recognition system that tracked and identified your various facial expressions and then mapped those to any number of emotional states. And when we first started, it could only recognize a smile, an eyebrow raise, a brow furrow. But over time, it now has a repertoire of over 40 different emotional states. And the range of applications is numerous. We service about a third of the Fortune 500 companies globally to understand the emotional connection their consumers have with their products and videos and content. And then a number of years ago, we pivoted to the automotive market, where we now build driver monitoring systems and cabin monitoring systems to really understand what's happening in the car and with the driver. Is the driver attentive? Are they falling asleep? And think of it as being a co-pilot to the both driver and also passengers in the vehicle.
In 2021, Affectiva was acquired by a company called SmartEye, but the closing of one door meant the opening of the next. Rana has since launched her career as an investor, focusing on companies revolutionizing the field of AI.
So I've been investing for the last 3 years. I started a fund with a friend of mine, Rob May. We've made 40 investments. And then I'm now partnering with Gabby Zeiderveld, who was part of my team at Affectiva, and we are launching Blue Tulip Ventures to invest in human-centric AI. So entrepreneurship again, but in a different form. And I just love being in innovation kind of spaces. And I also love supporting founders on their journeys. I found from my experience that some of my investors were so instrumental to our journey at Affectiva, with being thought partners, being strategic advisors, being connectors and door openers. And I want to do the same for founders of early stage companies. I also think it's an amazing time in AI, and actually, you're one of my inspirations and mentors when it comes to that. It's an amazing time to be investing in AI. It's still early days. I think the next generation AI companies and transformative companies of our generation are being born now. And how cool would it be to play a part in these companies' journeys?
Now, part of what we're doing in this podcast is we're going to be introducing another podcast, because in addition to your hats as academic, inventor, entrepreneur, CEO, investor, you're also going to be becoming a podcaster. And part of what you're going to be doing is Pioneers of AI. So say a little bit about what the podcast is, why now, what journey will the podcast be heading out on?
Yeah, it's another kind of entrepreneurial journey, I would say. A guide for all things AI to people who are both experts in the AI space, who kind of just struggle with keeping up with all the innovations and what's happening in AI. But ideally, one of our goals is to also expand the audience for AI and make AI more inclusive, so that you can come to the podcast to understand AI, embrace AI, anticipate what's coming next with AI. I also am very passionate about platforming voices that we don't typically hear from. So that's going to be one of our goals as well.
Pioneers of AI is a podcast that focuses on all the big questions around AI and the latest trends. Many technologists will say that the biggest trend in the forecast is Agentic AI. That is, AI that can perform tasks for us without any assistance.
The best AI agent, in my opinion, would be one that knows you really well. And one way to know you really well is, of course, to get access to all of your information and maybe your health, whatever health device you're wearing, and your bank account, so that it can act on your behalf and whatnot. But another way it gets to really know you is through your emotional experiences and what's your emotional state. Are you stressed? Are you happy? Are you anxious? So that it can really customize and personalize its interactions, just the way an awesome friend would do. And I think that's still missing. That's still missing from where AI is at. And memory plays a big part of that. You and I have talked about this before, right? How do you build actual models of memory and getting to learn a person?
Because part of how trust is established is that you believe that the person knows you, cares about you, understands what's kind of good for you and interest and so forth, and will act in those ways. And memory, of course, is essential to all of that,
Right. And if it's not there, right, then yeah, exactly. Then the interaction suffers. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know this as deeply as anyone in the world, but like obviously one of the things about this agentic future is going to be kind of establishing trust. Mm-hmm. So what do you think is going to be important, not just for gaining trust, but actually in fact being kind of a faithful holder of trust?
I would say like really knowing what's happening to your data, like understanding, well, first of all, understanding who's behind these agentic AIs, like the company that's building these technologies. I think that needs to be trustworthy. Knowing where and how your data is being used, that's so important. So I think a certain level of transparency around that is important, and also control over that. The relationship between a person and their AI agents is so important. Like, how much autonomy do you want to give your AI agents, and does that build over time as you trust them more and more? Question mark. So there's a lot of questions that we ought to be asking, kind of as design decisions when we're building these AI agents.
So, as we foreshadowed, well, we've talked about you starting a new podcast. We're going to switch hosts, and you're now the host for the second half of this podcast. So I am handing the mic over to you.
So exciting. Well, it is a pleasure to have you as my guest, Reid. And I will start by saying you also have a new podcast joining our network. Share a bit about Possible.
One of the things that I think is a great disservice to humanity that's happening across media, across government discussions and so forth, is a fear and dystopia approach to technology first versus a possibility and a creation. And it doesn't mean that it needs to be blind, optimism or blind utopic, because, navigating, how do you get to the good is really important. Like, for example, when you're driving somewhere, you don't get somewhere by going, I'm first going to figure out all the things that could go wrong before I get in the car.
Right.
Well, it could spin out of control. I'm going to make sure I could hit a tree. You got to start driving towards a location, and you have to have some place you're going, right? You can't just go, well, if I eliminate all the bad, then the good will happen. That's not actually, in fact, how a journey and a creation and invention happens. It's a going towards something. So the real question is what should you shape towards? And part of the reason I decided to add Possible into the pantheon, so we have Master Scale for kind of scale companies and entrepreneurs and journey and impact, and then Possible is, okay, what could possibly go right? What should we be building towards? And it is not, it's definitely positive, but it's positive in a, how do you chart the journey? How do you navigate? And that's what, that's why I added it in to the pantheon of podcasts.
I love that, because sometimes you need to create the possibility, like literally for people, and then you plant that idea or you create that image or picture of the future, and then people can work towards it. But right now there is so much fear. So you talk a lot about AI unlocking human potential. What do you mean by that?
So, last year, I published the first book on AI, co-written with AI. My co-writer was GPT-4.
I believe I have it here. Ta-da!
Exactly. I understand why, John McCarthy et al., called it artificial intelligence, especially back then. But, it actually now has a little bit of a misnomer. And so I called it, amplification intelligence, because it's an amplifier of human capabilities. And that doesn't mean that just like, kind of other technologies, sometimes parts of it so outstrip human that the technology just does it itself. I mean, like, for example, we don't have humans plowing farm fields anymore. But in the change of the landscape, part of course, the discourse has been, kind of almost like the movie Idiocracy. Like, is AI going to be doing everything, and are we going to be sitting on the couches, drinking Gatorade and kind of watching numbing Aldous Huxley Brave New World, becoming just kind of sensate, bundles of like lymphatic response.
Yeah.
I just think that it's just not very likely. You have all these discussions about like, you could just, fire my marketing department, use GPT-4. It's like, well, go look at it. No, you can't. Right. And by the way, marketing is a competition between, multiple organizations. And of course, if you're not using GPT-4, and other AI tools in your marketing today, you're falling behind. You're not using key tool sets. But it's human beings doing it and being amplified in various ways. And you should be looking at what are the ways in this human competition, just like, for example, I use really good running shoes, or I use, flippers, or I use scuba tanks, or I use, What's the way that I can be deploying this technology to be furthering, my human objectives, my humanist objectives, my business objectives, etc. And so that's what the unlocking human potential. And by the way, AI and the amplification it brings will have some of those challenges for people, full stop. And we need to help and be more sympathetic. But ultimately, better for your children, better for society, better for industry. And if you keep a learning and evolving mindset, it can be better for you too.
So for some of our listeners who are kind of listening to this conversation and they're still kind of weary of AI, what are some of the applications of AI that you're most excited about?
Well, part of when I'm talking to government folks who are like, press is telling me that my primary job is to limit big tech. And part of the problem, of course, is a lot of the driver of AI, of this new this cognitive industrial revolution we're getting, is emerging from big tech. And I say, well, actually, in fact, while this is what everyone's kind of singing the song you should be doing, I have an alternative vision, which is we have a line of sight. We could construct in a small number of months a medical assistant that is as capable as kind of call it, an average GP or better, that could run for, small number of dollars per hour. How do you get that to be made and available to everybody? And then, everybody who has access to a smartphone.
Yep.
And then you have a medical assistant for the billions of people in the world who do not have access to a doctor. And by the way, even here in the US, there are millions of people who do not really have access to a doctor, other than an ER room, and they may not even have access to an ER room. And so that's one, and that will require some modifications of liability law, some incentives, and other things. The second one, which I also think is super important, is a tutor on every skill, every capability, every subject for every age, infinitely patient. Again, runnable on a smartphone. Wealthy people have always been able to afford tutors for themselves or for their kids.
Right.
Now it can be everybody.
Yeah. I love that you've highlighted those two applications in particular. I'm passionate about both of them. It's this idea of democratizing access to quality health and quality education around the world. It's very possible, like right back to your new podcast. It is so possible. Like the data's there. You can create these like co-pilots for health and career coaches, right? That can be kind of learning companions and career companions. It's so exciting. What are some of the things that concern you when it comes to AI?
Look, it is definitely possible that bad things can happen. Now, one of the reasons why I kind of advocate very strongly against the existential risk, the robots are coming, Terminator movie, et cetera, is because most of the real bad things to focus on are AI in the hands of, kind of bad human beings, whether it's criminals, so cybercrime, terrorists, a variety of things, rogue states, interference with elections, all of this kind of stuff, in the hands of human beings with bad intents, because we have those too, are the top concerns that I have. Now, again, a little bit of the tech lash is people tend to say, well, but what about, like, for example, things like hallucination or bad statement, like perpetuating a racial stereotype? And shouldn't we not launch until there was zero of that? And I was like, well, I tend to have the same view that I have on most things, which is you can never get all of these things in these complicated systems to zero. So the better thing is make sure that you've got baseline good and then be improving constantly on those. So you launch anyway. One of the things that I've helped set up with various 501c3s is, hosted conversations across all of the major tech developers to talk about, what kind of things could go wrong and what are safety cases and what should be on the test safety thing. So people who are obviously don't have visibility naturally get some
sensationalized, right?
Yes.
Right.
And look, having low visibility, a fear response is not irrational. Right? Because what are you guys doing? Are you just trying to build an AI that's just kind of trying to manipulate me to buy things I don't know, I don't want, or get really angry, so I spend a bunch of time on social media? So those are all definitely in the concerns, but there's the concerns that you go, let's steer right now and then what are the ones that are dynamic and iterating? And the list of dynamic and iterating is very long, and the list of prevent before it could ever launch is compact and fixed.
I'm hearing you also say that there just needs to be a lot of intentionality about how we're building these technologies and kind of thinking ahead of time about what are the unintended consequences, what could potentially go wrong, and just, but not letting us stop our innovation for that. So let's switch to investor mode. The next $1 trillion company is going to be AI first, and it's being born now. You've been investing in AI for many, many years. In fact, I believe you were one of the early investors in OpenAI. What do you look for when you're vetting these AI startups? Because every startup today is an AI startup, right? So how do you truly vet what's going to be transformative?
Yeah, and I did actually lead the first kind of commercial round into OpenAI. So you look for a set of characteristics which are sufficient, kind of knowledge of the technology, an understanding at least of what problems they're going to need to be solving. They may not have the solutions yet, but what problems are, and they have a good map. So part of the investor dialogue with them is how do you see your game? How do you see what the challenge of this is? And, another thing that is kind of a classic regular entrepreneurial failure is I just build a great product and it all works out, and you have to have a go-to-market strategy and distribution strategy, which is, as important as your product in most cases, sometimes even more. One of the definitions I read about entrepreneurs, 20 years ago, is an entrepreneur makes plans that outstrip their current resources, and that is a truth. It isn't the only thing about entrepreneur, but it's I'm going to have to be acquiring capital and talent and customers and go to market. And so you have to do all of those kinds of things. So all of that characteristic within the founding team is kind of general across a lot of these things, although some of them tie into the specifics of what the game looks like now. One of the things I love about entrepreneurship and technology is the game changes on a very fast time period. So an answer now evolves and changes. One of the things about entrepreneurship that's underdescribed is what you're really seeking is to be competitively strong, which means competing against either non-existent competition or weak competition. And if you're jumping into a field where there's multiple really strong startup competitors, it's much, much harder. For example, I'm a little bit more cautious about people coming in and saying, I've got a new chatbot idea. Well, there's a lot of chatbot ideas that have been going for a few years now. So it's, it's not never, but you really have to have something that's an interesting, kind of play. But to look at, kind of what are other areas that could be really interesting. And also when you're charting that path ahead, you're going to you're skating where the puck is moving towards and where you're building it towards, not to where the puck is today. Do you have a good vision of that? So I tend to look for things that are not as populated, right? And it's one of the reasons why, I led the Series A and Airbnb, and I was, the first money in, along with Peter Thiel into Facebook, And, kind of part of the reason why, I did the angel investment in PayPal and joined as an executive. Like in a venture thing, what you're kind of ideally looking for is at day one of the investment, everyone thinks you're a little crazy. And then at like year 2, it's like, oh yeah, that's credible. And at year 3 to 5, it's obvious.
Amazing. All right, we could go on forever, but I am going to wrap up our interview together. So if you could have AI do anything for you, what would that be?
I love Ethan Mullick's line, today's AI is the worst AI you're ever going to use. And so this answer should change on a regular basis.
I love that.
Right. If today, what I would love AI to do, and I don't think it's quite there yet, I would love it to basically look at to be a front end to my complete communications inbox. Everything from email to, Signal and WhatsApp, and like intelligently triage that. So that I go, okay, like for example, if I wake up in the morning, I don't have to check my email first thing because it'll go, I just, talk to the assistant, and the assistant goes, these 3 things that you really probably need to know right now, first thing in the morning before you go get your coffee.
Love
right?
that. I would love that.
And by the way, here is 10 things that I might be able to craft good responses to. Here's some drafts. What do you think? Right? But that kind of thing to facilitate that communication, because again, that's amplification of human potential. And the idea is to still keep me very centrally in the loop, but to give me superpowers.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to becoming a deeply intrigued listener, and occasional participant.
Yeah,
so this is awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, we still have you. Search for Pioneers of AI wherever you're tuning in right now and subscribe. You can find the first episode. It's right there in the feed. It features Dr. Joy Bullum-Weaney, who's one of the world's leading experts in algorithmic bias. This is a must-listen for anyone concerned about how to make safe AI that benefits all of us.